Dear students, today we will discuss the third part of the development of heart, which will conclude the normal development of heart. And in the fourth lecture, we will take the congenital abnormalities of development of heart. With the normal development of heart, now we have to discuss the absorption of certain structures in the right atrium and the left atrium. First, we will take right atrium and then left atrium. So important thing to understand is that both the right and the left atrium, they grow in size by absorbing venous structures into their wall. The right atrium absorbs the right horn of the sinus venosus, and the left atrium enlarges in size by absorbing the pulmonary veins into it. So first, the right atrium. Partly we have discussed it in our previous lecture as well. We discussed that the right horn of the sinus venosus becomes larger in size, while the left horn becomes much smaller and remains as coronary sinus and oblique vein of left atrium, but the right horn becomes larger and its opening moves to the center of the right atrium, and this opening is an elliptical, vertical elliptical opening, and on each side of this opening two valvular flaps are present, one on the right side, one on the left side, and they are called right and left venous valves accordingly. And spirally, these venous valves fuse with each other to form a short septum, which is called septum spurium. This has also been discussed. Now, during 7th and 8th week, when the right atrium enlarges rapidly in size and the right horn of the sinus. So, when the right atrium enlarges, the right and left venous valves, which are guarding the opening of the right horn of the sinus venosus, they move away from each other, and gradually the right horn of the sinus venosus is taken up into the wall of the right atrium. The left venous valve reaches the interatrial septum and fuses with it. The right venous valve mostly disappears, but its lower part persists to form the valves of the inferior vena cava and valve of the coronary sinus. Now, the posterior part of the right atrium, obviously because the right horn of the sinus venosus is present posterior to the right atrium, so posterior part of the right atrium is derived from the absorbed right horn of the sinus venosus, and being a venous structure, sinus venosus is a venous structure, and it has a thin wall and it is internally smooth. So the wall of the posterior part of the right horn, posterior part of the right atrium, which is called sinus venerum. Posterior part of the right atrium comes to be called sinus venerum, and this is that part of right atrium which is derived from the absorbed right horn of the sinus venosus. It is thin-walled and internally it is smooth, does not show any irregularities. And these vascular irregularities are seen in the anterior part of the right atrium, which is not derived from the right horn of the sinus venosus, and these muscular irregularities, roughness, is known as these represent the muscles in the wall of the right atrium, so they are accordingly called musculi pectinati. And sinus venerum, that is the smooth part of the right atrium, is separated from the anterior part of the right atrium from the thick walled rough part of the right atrium by now in this diagram you can see that this is the opening of the right heart of sinus venosus, and on each side there is a valve. This is the right left venous valve, on the right side there is right venous valve, and this pink color indicates the absorbed part of the right horn of the sinus process. As the sinus process is being absorbed, and on the left side, which we will discuss later, we'll see that here this color indicates that part of the atrium which is being of the left atrium, of course, is being found as a result of absorption of pulmonary veins, but that we will discuss later. So this shows this pinkish color shows that this is the sinus venerum coming into existence, and in the anterior part you can see there are musculi pectinati, and these are the rough the markings of the muscles on the inner aspect. They will be restricted to the anterior part only. In this diagram, further absorption of the right hand of sinus venosus has occurred. More part of the right atrium consists of absorbed right hand of the sinus venosus, and in this diagram, further also the sinus venerum is forming the posterior part of the right atrium, and this part is the anterior part, and between them is present the vista terminalis, which is a faint ridge separating the sinus venerum from the rough anterior part of the right atrium. So in this way, in this diagram you can see the more in the left atrium, because we are just going to discuss that the absorption has occurred more, and instead of one pulmonary vein, two pulmonary veins are opening, and in this more absorption has occurred, and the four pulmonary veins are opening in it. The pulmonary veins are absorbed into the left atrium that we will now. So the pulmonary veins, originally only one pulmonary vein grows out from the posterior wall of the left atrium towards the lungs. Then it divides into right and left branch, and then each right and left branch of the pulmonary vein further divides into two branches. So two veins are ultimately found for each lung. The tissue for the development of the pulmonary vein is derived from DMP, which we discussed in last lecture. The DMP is a mass of mesodermal cells derived from the dorsal mesentery, and it descends with the septum primum, finally comes to lie in the wall of the left atrium, and then gives rise to pulmonary veins. And as we have discussed, that as the left atrium grows and enlarges in size, pulmonary first the pulmonary vein itself, then its two branches, and then part of the four branches are absorbed into it, and that is how the left atrium grows in size. And finally, most of the left atrium, that is most of the adult left atrium, consists of the absorbed pulmonary veins, and the proof for that is that its wall is thin, and internal surface of this wall is smooth, does not show any vasculopectinity, and the original left atrium becomes reduced to the left auricle, which is also known as left auricular appendage, and that shows the vasculopectinity and is thick-walled. Otherwise, the main left atrium is formed from the absorbed pulmonary veins. This is another diagram. We see, as we saw in the previous diagram, the pulmonary vein grows out from the posterior wall of the left atrium, then divides into two, and then each of its two branches divide further into two branches each. So two pulmonary veins for each lung are here to bring the blood back from two from the right lung and two from the left lung. Then absorption starts. As you can see, blue color shows the absorbed pulmonary veins. The stem of the pulmonary vein is being absorbed, and when the whole of the stem of the original pulmonary vein has been absorbed, then two veins are seen to be opening into the posterior wall of the left atrium. But finally, this absorption continues, and then four veins are opening into the posterior wall of the left atrium, and most of the wall of the left atrium consists of the absorbed pulmonary veins, and only this thick uh, wall part which is showing musculi pectinatus is reduced to left auricular appendage or left auricle. So this is very important to understand that the right atrium as well as left atrium grow in size by absorption of venous structures. The contribution to the right atrium is not that great as it is in left atrium. In the right atrium, only the posterior part, which is called sinus venerum, is derived from the absorbed venous structure, which is the right horn of sinus venosus. While in the left atrium, most of it, or almost 80-90% of its wall consists of absorbed pulmonary veins, and the original wall of the atrium is reduced only to left or and partitioning of the conus cordis and truncus arteriosus. We will see a diagram very soon. So swellings or ridges are formed in the conus cordis. These are called bulbar ridges. They are also known as conal swellings because they are found in the conus cordis, but they are also known as bulbar ridges. And they grow toward each other and then meet each other and fuse with each other to form a septum in the conus cordis. This is called conal septum, and by the formation of conal septum, the conus cordis is divided into two parts. One part is added to the right ventricle. This is the anterolateral part of the conus cordis, and it forms the outflow tract of the right ventricle, which is called infundibulum or conus arteriosus. And the postobedial part is added to the left ventricle to form the outflow tract of the left ventricle. It is also known as aortic vestibule. So the fate of the conus cordis is that it is divided into two parts by conal septum. One part of it is added to the right ventricle, other part is added to the left ventricle. In both ventricles, the parts derived from the conus cordis form the outflow tracts of the ventricle. The cardiac neural crest cells, you must remember, they are very important in the development of the heart, especially in the development of the septa within the heart, especially again in the formation of septa in the conus cordis and truncus arteriosus. And the neural crest cells, which are originally derived from the neural tube, they originate in the hindbrain region of the neural tube and migrate into the third, fourth, and sixth pharyngeal arches. There, of course, as we will discuss in the development of head and neck, they contribute to the development of skeletal components of the third, fourth, and sixth arches. Then some of these neural crest cells migrate from the pharyngeal arches and uh, come to lie in the region of developing heart. In the beginning, the heart is developing quite high, as we have discussed already. It is almost in the cervical region. Later on, it is. So when it is present very close to the pharyngeal arches, the neural crest cells from the pharyngeal arches migrate into the developing heart, and they contribute to the formation of septa, the conus cordis, and truncus arteriosus. So that implies that if anything wrong happens with the migration of, excuse me, with the migration of the neural crest cells, there will be a defect in the formation of septa in the heart, and as we will discuss in the abnormalities of the heart, the defects in the septum formation in various parts of the heart is related to deficient, improper, or complete failure of migration of neural crest cells. And remember, when neural crest cells they are defective or deficient, they are usually also deficient in the pharyngeal arches as well. So the defects of the heart are many times accompanied by defects of the face and cranial region. They are called craniofacial defects. If a child born with craniofacial defects is examined by you, you must also examine the heart for anomalies, and vice versa also. If an anomaly in the heart is discovered in a newborn child, you must also look for craniofacial anomalies because their developments are interrelated. Suppose this is a diagram showing the neural crest cells migrating from the neural tube, from the hindbrain region of the neural tube to the pharyngeal arch region, and from the pharyngeal, this is the pharyngeal arches, the aortic arches passing through the pharyngeal arches, and from the pharyngeal arch region, as you can see, they are migrating into the developing heart, where they will take part in the they will contribute tissue to the formation of septa of the heart, especially in the conus cordis and truncus arteriosus. Truncus arteriosus, the beginning I told you that it is divided into two parts by a septum which is called aorticopulmonary septum, because the truncus arteriosus becomes divided into the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta by the formation of the septum, and the septum is formed in the same way as is formed in the conus cordis. The ridges appear, they grow toward each other, fuse with each other, and they form a septum which is called, it is not called truncal septum, usually it is known as aorticopulmonary septum. But the septum in the conus cordis, that is caudal septum, and the aorticopulmonary septum, because they beat each other edge to edge and are continuous with each other, they are collectively known as conotruncal septum. And defective migration or deficiency of neural crest cells affects the conotruncal development of conotruncal septum. And because the aorticopulmonary septum and coronal septum are uh, joined to each other edge to edge, so the outflow tract of the right ventricle becomes continuous with the pulmonary trunk, and the outflow tract of the left ventricle becomes continuous with the ascending aorta. These diagrams, you can see the ridges, bulbar ridges appearing in the and the conal ridges appearing in the conus cordis and truncus arteriosus. In the region of conus cordis, there are called conal ridges sometimes, but as a whole, these ridges appearing in the conus cordis and truncus arteriosus are called bulbar ridges. They grow toward each other and they finally fuse with each other and divide the conus cordis into two parts, each part forming the outflow tract of a ventricle, while the truncus arteriosus is divided into pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. One thing to notice that, as you can see in this diagram, the aorticopulmonary septum, which is found in the truncus arteriosus, this is not a straight septum as compared to the other septa, especially the septum in the conus cordis is straight septum, divides the conus cordis into two parts, the aortic vestibule and infundibulum. But the septum which is formed in the truncus arteriosus, it is formed in a spiral manner, as you can see in this diagram. And due to this spiral arrangement, the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk are related to each other in a spiral fashion. If you look at the gross anatomy of the heart or study gross anatomy of the heart, look at a picture of the gross anatomy of the heart, then you will see that they the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta form a kind of spiral around each other. That is due to the spiral formation of aorticopulmonary septum. And in this diagram, in both these diagrams, you will see that is because we are going to discuss this topic later. The formation of interventricular septum is the interventricular septum is the muscular part of the interventricular septum, and this foramen, this gap is called interventricular foramen, and it is closed from three sources, and you can see three colors: it's brown, green, and blue, from different sources. From the left bulbar ridge, from the is the blue one, and this brown one is from the right bulbar ridge, and this green one is from the inferior endocardial cushion. So from these three sources, tissue is derived which closes the interventricular foramen, and then interventricular septum is complete. That we are going to take now, but this diagram you must keep in mind. That is why I have pointed it out at this. This is also a good diagram showing four or more sketches. Especially shown is the spiral formation of the septum in the truncus arteriosus. That is aorticopulmonary septum is formed in a spiral manner. This is here you see the bulbar ridges or truncal ridges. They are approaching each other, but they have developed in a spiral manner. The development has occurred in a spiral. As you can see, there is a spiral here, and finally they meet each other and divide the truncus arteriosus into aorta pulmonary trunk, and you can see this yellow color is for the truncal or aorticopulmonary septum, and it is making a spiral, and these arrows show the spiral arrangement of these vessels around each other. And this is the pulmonary trunk. This blue arrow passing through the pulmonary trunk, and pink arrow passing through the aorta, ascending aorta. So this is how it is divided, and then this is a sketch of the adult heart, which shows that the pulmonary trunk here, this is the pulmonary trunk, and the aorta, they are making spiral around each other. Here they have gross anatomy wise. Talking of gross anatomy, the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta, they are arranged around each other in a spiral manner. The reason is that the development reason for this is that the aorticopulmonary septum is formed in a spiral manner, and that is why the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk are arranged around in relation to each other in a spiral. Another diagram showing the same thing: spiral aorticopulmonary septum. You can very well see the spiral in it. This is very diagrammatic. This is the region of spiral. Direction changes and then it becomes like this. And these are the sections by which you can trace the spiral nature of the aorticopulmonary septum. And this diagram shows the spiral arrangement of the pulmonary trunk and the ascending aorta around each other or in relation to each other. Then the development of the interventricular septum. In the beginning, the ventricle outward it shows two bulgings, but on the inner side, that is interior of the ventricle, is a common chamber, and we cannot distinguish the right and left ventricles, though we know that the right ventricle is derived from the lower part of the bulbous cordis and some part of the primitive ventricle, and it also receives contribution from the conus cordis in the form of infundibulum. And left ventricle is mainly derived from the original primitive ventricle, and it is also receiving contribution from cornus cordis in the form of its outflow tract, that is the aortic vestibule. Now the cavity of the ventricle is divided into separate right and left ventricles by the formation of a septum which is called interventricular septum. And this developmentally has got two parts: septum musculaire, which is the muscular part, and the septum membranaceum, which is the membranous part. The septum musculaire grows from the floor as the two ventricles, which are forming two pouches, they grow rapidly. So from the floor of the ventricle, uh, a muscular ridge projects upwards and forms the uh, septum muscular part or muscular septum, and the upper edge of this muscular septum is also crescentic like the septa which we discussed in atria, development of interatrial septum. Their lower edge was crescentic, here its upper edge is crescentic, and there remains a gap between the upper edge of the septum musculaire and the septum intermedium or fused and endocardial cushions, and this gap is known as interlumen. So it grows upwards, but after seventh week it starts, its growth upward stops, and there remains a gap between the fused endocardial cushions and the upper free margin of the growing interventricular septum. So this gap is called interventricular foramen, and this foramen permits temporary communication between the right and the left ventricle. Now it is very important, which I have shown you in the last diagram, that the interventricular foramen is closed in the late seventh week by tissue derived from three sources, which I have shown you in the previous diagram. These three sources are the inferior endocardial cushion and the two bulbar ridges, right bulbar ridge and left bulbar ridge. From these three sources, the uh, the membranous part of the interventricular septum or septum membranaceum is formed, and because the tissue of the septum membranaceum is derived from three sources, so many times uh, one of these sources or two of these sources may not develop normally, and there can be a defect in the septum membranaceum, producing an interventricular septal defect. And obviously the results of formation of septum membranaceum is that the interventricular septum becomes complete, interventricular foramen is closed, and the original common cavity of the ventricle now becomes divided into separate right ventricle and left ventricle, and cavity of the right ventricle is continuous with the infundibulum or conus arteriosus, and the left ventricle cavity is continuous with its outflow tract, that is the aortic vestibule. Now this diagram uh, shows the development of course, the interatrial septum also, but here we are concerned with the development of interventricular septum. If you see in this section, this is a cornel section, that is sagittal section. This cornel section, you can see from the floor as the right and left ventricle, they grow in the form of separate out pouchings of the original ventricle. Externally there appears an interventricular groove, and internally there appears this ridge, muscular ridge, which grows upwards in the direction of fused endocardial cushions. This is the primordium of the interventricular septum, or primordium of the muscular part of the interventricular septum. This is the septum musculaire developing. Septum musculaire Here you can see the septum musculaire part, and this is the interventricular. This gap between the upper free edge of the septum musculaire and the fused endocardial cushions is the interventricular foramen, which is very well seen in this whitish gap, and this allows passage of blood from the right ventricle to the left ventricle in the embryonic life. But this is temporary foramen. It will be very soon closed by tissue derived from the inferior endocardial cushion, the right bulbar ridge, and the left. So in this diagram, you can see septum musculaire is appearing as an interventricular septum. Interventricular sulcus appears in the region where interventricular septum is to be formed. The left ventricle and the right ventricle, they are forming separate pouchings by their growth, and interventricular groove appears. Interventricular septum begins to grow as a muscular ridge upwards. So this is the septum musculaire or muscular part of interventricular septum developing. Then it stops short of the fused endocardial cushions. The interventricular foramen allows the passage of blood from right ventricle to left ventricle during abdominal life. And finally, as you can see, this gap is closed by tissue derived from the three sources I have already mentioned. And you can see that septum musculaire is much thicker than the septum membranaceum, because the septum membranaceum is known as septum membranaceum because it is thin and membranous. It is not muscular, but this part of the lower part of the septum is thick and muscular, and this is the original septum musculaire. Then few words about differentiation of the cardiac wall. In the beginning, the myocardium is present as a solid layer, but very soon it becomes differentiated into two layers. Outer layer remains compact, solid or compact, but inner layer becomes spongy because of the because of the formation of many spaces and cavities due to apoptosis or programmed cell death. The cardiac muscle cells, they die and produce small spaces and cavities, due to which the inner layer of the cardiac wall becomes spongy, meaning it shows spaces. And because it becomes spongy, so irregular trabeculae project from this spongy layer into uh, the right ventricle and left ventricle, and and of course the endocardium or the lining endothelium dips into line these spaces, and the trabeculae and whole of the interior of the right and left ventricle is lined by endocardium. To be precise, the endothelium and underlining thin subendocardial layer, which together these endothelium and the subendocardial layer are known as endocardium. In this diagram, you can see uh, 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 spaces are appearing in the inner layer of the myocardium. Outer layer remains compact, and these as these spaces enlarge and merge with each other, muscular cords, trabeculae and muscular cords are formed on the inner aspect of the right ventricle and left ventricle, and some of these muscular trabeculae, they change into papillary muscles, and the distal ends of these cords become fibrous to form chordae tendineae. So these are the papillary muscles which are derived from the muscular cords, which uh, link up. These muscular cords are joined to the developing the valves between the atria and ventricles, atrioventricular valves, and those parts of these muscular cords which are fused with the developing with the cusps of the developing atrioventricular valves. These become fibrous. They undergo fibrous degeneration and form cord-like structures, which are called chordae tendineae, while the proximal parts of these muscular trabeculae remain muscular and form these pyramidal type of muscles, which are called papillary muscles. So we will discuss it again in the development of the heart. So as the inner layer becomes spongy, so on the inner side there are muscular irregularities in the atria as musculi pectinati and in the ventricles as trabeculae carnii. Trabeculae carnii are much more prominent and they form uh, trabeculae in the real sense, which later change into some of which later change into the papillary muscles and uh, also chordae tendineae as they become uh, converted into fibrous tissue in the distal parts. So the myocardial layer in the ventricle, both ventricles is thicker, but the thicker than that of the atria. The atria are much thinner wall than the uh, ventricles, and then the atria also become further thin walled when the venous structures like right heart of the sinus venosus in the right atrium and pulmonary veins in the left atrium are observed. They become further thin in their thickness of their wall becomes decreased. Uh, and in the beginning, talking of ventricles, both ventricles have similar thickness, but it is after birth that the left ventricle becomes gradually thicker because it has to work harder and it has to push blood into the aorta against resistance, and that is why the wall of the left ventricle becomes thicker, but that is after birth. Before birth, the wall of the left ventricle and right ventricle, they are having almost similar thickness. So this diagram shows these capillary muscles, chordae tendineae, and these cusps of the atrioventricular valves, which we are going to discuss. The atrioventricular valves on the right side, there are three cusps. That is the tricuspid valve. On the left side, there are two cusps. It is mitral valve, and these trabeculae in the wall of the left ventricle and right ventricle. This is the right ventricle. These are the papillary muscles of the right ventricle, and these are chordae tendineae of the tricuspid valve. And these are the papillary muscles of the left ventricle and chordae tendineae, which are attaching to valvular folds or valvular cusps of the mitral valve. So cardiac valves, valves at the origin of pulmonary trunk and aorta. These are known as semilunar valves, and then there are valves at the junction of atria and ventricles with each other. Right atrium with the right ventricle, where the tricuspid valve is formed, and the left ventricle with the left atrium communicates through the mitral valve. So first taking the semilunar valves, which are formed at the origin of pulmonary trunk and aorta. The purpose of the valves is to ensure unidirectional flow of blood, so that blood can pass from the right ventricle into pulmonary trunk but not back. Similarly, from the left ventricle into the ascending aorta but not back. And this valvular mechanism is ensured by the formation of uh, valvular flaps, which are called cusps. But no papillary muscles or no chordae tendineae are attached to the cusps of the semilunar valves. And neural crest cells also contribute to the development of semilunar valves. So this is also to be remembered. So three swellings formed at the origin of the pulmonary artery and similarly at the origin of the ascending aorta. They become hollowed out on their distal aspect. Diagram. Of course, in section we can see only two, but in the next diagram we may see that that is a cross section, but this is not a cross section, longitudinal section showing the swellings at the origin of, let us say this is pulmonary trunk swellings, and then the no, so these are the atrioventricular valves and the semilunar valves. We are talking of semilunar valves. Swellings appear, and then on their distal side, this tissue is mesenchyme is degenerated, disappears, cells die out by apoptosis, and these valvular flaps are formed when the distal part of the swellings become hollowed out by the process of apoptosis. These are the atrioventricular valves. Again, swellings, two in the left ventricle and the junction of left ventricle and left atrium, and three, of course, at the junction of right atrium and right ventricle. And here the hollowing occurs on their undersurface, and this is the shape of the cusps, which become attached to the pulmonary muscles and through the chordae tendineae. These are the chordae tendineae, and these are the papillary. So here you can see the formation of semilunar valves. First, this truncus arteriosus is divided into uh, the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta by the bulbar ridges which fuse with each other, and then in each of the origin of pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta, three swelling, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 swellings are formed. These are swellings, three at the beginning of aorta and three at the beginning of pulmonary trunk. And in this diagram, you can see how the hollowing of these swelling occurs to form the valvular cusps. These arrows show the region where hollowing is taking place, more hollowing, and finally we see that distal parts of the swellings have become hollowed out, and they form these cusps, which form a valvular mechanism. They allow the blood to pass in this direction, that is from the pulmonary trunk, from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk, but not back, and from the left ventricle to the aorta, but not back. The atrioventricular valves, which are found in the atrioventricular canals. In the right atrioventricular canal, which is present at the junction of right atrium and the right ventricle, we know that the tricuspid valve is formed at the junction of left atrium and the left ventricle, that is at the left atrioventricular canal. Mitral valve is formed. Mitral valve has two cusps, and the tricuspid valve has three cusps. And partly we have seen this already, that swellings appear, they become hollowed out on their ventricular aspect, not on their distal aspect, but on the ventricular aspect, and then the cup-shaped structures, which are the cusps, are formed, and to these cusps are attached the trabeculae, which are formed in the pulmonary muscles. This we have discussed, and uh, also seen in the previous diagrams, that papillary muscles is a name given to the proximal parts of those trabeculae which persist in the form of muscular strands, and distal part of these papillary muscles were originally attached to the developing cusps by muscular strands, but later these muscular parts of uh, these strands become changed or converted into fibrous strands to form chordae tendineae. That is how the papillary muscles are attached to the cusps of the atrioventricular valves. Here in this diagram, which is the last diagram of our discussion, you can see this cavities being formed in the wall of the ventricles, especially this uh, trabeculae are being formed, and you can see when trabeculae are formed, because spaces are formed, these other muscular cords are trabeculae, and their distal part is attached to the developing cusps of the atrioventricular valves, while their proximal parts are present in relation or to the ventricular wall. And you can see in this diagram, these cusps of the atrioventricular valves are being formed, And the proximal parts of the muscular cords or the trabeculae remain as papillary muscles, and these papillary muscles are obviously part of the wall of the each ventricle. They arise from the wall of the ventricle, but distal parts of these original muscular trabeculae undergo fibrous degeneration and are converted into these fibrous structures, which are called cordi tendini, tendinous cords, and they become attached to the ventricular aspect of these cusps of atrioventricular valves, which are formed by the hollowing out of the swellings formed in the atrioventricular canal of the right side and of the left side, and hollowing of these swellings on their ventricular side, and formation of cusps. So these are the atrioventricular valves. This is of left side. This is mitral valve, and this is the tricuspid valve, papillary muscles, and chordae